So today we're going to be talking about the films The Natural and Dances with Wolves. Both of these films, in relation to the kind of concept of myth and ritualism, are examples of nationalist myths. So they're myths that celebrate a nation's sense of identity, and in watching them, you kind of can get a feel for this sort of culture and environment that these movies exist in. And with myth ritualism in each of the films, the sort of balance of myth and rituals seem to be equal. They have an equal importance of sort of being a cycle of supporting one another, and they contribute to the idea of like being able to sort of read what the culture of that movie is. For the natural and specific, if we're thinking of ritual and the idea that ritual is something that's symbolic, it's a sacred action, the central ritual of the film is baseball itself. It's a sport that the plot revolves itself around in the natural. And I think with following the journey of our main character, Hobbs, you see that he is sort of like a wonder in this film. He achieves the impossible in landing hits that smash lights and clocks, and he literally destroys the casing on one of the balls that he hits. I think for his character specifically, that idea of achieving the impossible is sort of intrinsically tied to this idea of magic and it being able to affect the natural world, even in him being able to hit a ball and then lightning strikes. And the idea of this hero of the story sort of being intrinsically tied to nature itself is also shown even in the beginning of the film when we see him younger and we see lightning striking a tree. It's almost this call to action in a similar way to Joseph Campbell's theories on the hero's journey, with it being fated that he's he's going to become something greater, and then the process in which he chops down the tree and crafts the baseball, which is not the baseball, my apologies, the baseball bat, which is this extension of himself and especially his ability to play baseball. It's almost like his magical weapon for the film. It's personal, it's his, and it cycles back to that concept of how important baseball is as a ritual in the film. And the film, throughout the course of its duration, sort of asks questions about what baseball means to the character and to society. What is the higher purpose and what is the temptation in the story? Is it baseball? Is baseball the higher power or higher purpose and love the temptation? Or is love the temptation, or my apologies, or is love the higher power, the higher purpose, and baseball is the temptation, a sort of distraction from what's important? And you see Hobbs wrestling with wanting fame and, having natural talent in baseball, but also needing to work on it and sort of not being able to come into this sport until later in life. And by the end of the film, he sort of lands on this decision after this whole journey of chasing fame that the ultimate purpose of his involvement in baseball, his involvement in the world, is this idea of legacy and the love that he sort of cultivates in his relationships with people, and that fame, which he did chase for a good portion of the film, is unreliable. And so even in the use of the scenes in the beginning of the film and the end of the film, where we're introduced to baseball as sort of the focus of the film, baseball is played between family. It's from his father to him, and by the end of the film, it's from him to his son. It's something that you pass on to people, and even when he's in his big final game, his sort of weapon for his passion of life, his baseball bat, is destroyed, and it calls into question whether or not his power and prowess in sports relies on this sort of symbol of baseball. And he ends up being granted a baseball bat that he is alluded to having made, or at least inspired the baseball boy for the team to have crafted this and sparked this fire in this young boy. And he ends up landing a miraculous hit and achieving the impossible. So you see that through the course of the film, and especially with the beginning and the end, that he realizes what his higher purpose is, that it's love, that it's baseball is sort of a function of this. And you see, and the connection to myth in this film and especially in relation to baseball, is this idea of newspapers and stories sort of being the platform in which the legends of heroes is sort of laid out. And, we see how Hobbes comes to fame through montages of newspaper clippings and the news. And it shows how your worth as a person, as a baseball player, can be earned, especially because he's so heavily spoken against earlier in the film for coming from nowhere, for later in the film for being on the older side. But his ability to sort of flourish in the ritual is he becomes acclaimed in his depiction in the myths, in the newspapers. And this is how we see society in this film function with myth and ritual. They consume the newspapers or they watch the news. And so that's kind of how that film operates with myth and ritual. And in Dances with Wolves, which is, a different movie in many, many ways, we do still have that sort of balance of myth and ritual, this relationship of reliance on one another. And in Dances with Wolves in particular, we see that ritual it's intrinsically tied to life and the culture of a community, and can kind of be chalked up to many different forms of just day-to-day life. And we see this more explicitly with the Shu people, of seeing that they have traditions for hunting, traditions for before, in preparation for hunting or after they hunt. And because we're following the plot of a man who is American and has, starts out in the army, and we sort of see him build a relationship with the Shu people. But you definitely see in the beginning there's a bit of a culture clash. They can't even understand one another. And we see later in the film that they sort of bridge this gap by exchanging one another's rituals, what with sort of the introduction of the use of the coffee grinder, and then in exchange, introducing him to the buffalo hunt and trading clothing, and even the process of granting names to people. You kind of see when he's granted the name Dances with Wolves, it's a ritual in their society of sort of respecting that person and giving them a myth to the entirety of them as a person, a story that is central to what they mean to the community. And I think this is similar. I think this original juxtaposition of these cultures in this film is similar to Claude Lévi-Strauss's idea of binary opposites. Sort of, these are very different societies, and you kind of see that in the resolution of them being able to initiate one another into their rituals and how their communities function. You see a resolution of, well, they have more in common than you realize, and being people and still experiencing love and compassion. And it surprises you. And I think that this also speaks to Bronislaw Malinowski's theory of participant observation, and sort of immersing yourself in a culture, not sort of speculating on what they're like from the outside. And that's how you get to that central theme of like compassion and humanity. And the way that myth operates in this film in relation to ritual is the act of the main character, Dances with Wolves, in actually journaling his entire process of meeting the people and sort of becoming a part of their community. And this is introduced early in the film, just early in his travels when he's drawing the night sky. And I don't think it necessarily means that the myth, because it's written down, gives meaning to the ritual. I think there is an inherent connection and value in the ritual that myth just sort of documents. It just serves as a way to explain it to others who are sort of just reading his journeys after the fact. So I think the overriding theme of both of the films is, especially in relation to Myth-Ritualism, is this idea that myth and ritual rely on one another to sort of explain the universe, the nation that these films live within.